The air in Elias Rourke's forge always smelled faintly of scorched iron and oil, the kind of scent that clung to a man's skin long after he left the workshop. He liked it that way. Each inhalation felt like proof of a day's honest work. That day, however, his concentration was fractured. A call from Detective Holden Vance had disrupted his rhythm. It wasn't the first time Holden had rung, but this time the tone was different, clipped, weighty. When Elias arrived at the station, Holden didn't greet him with small talk. Instead, he slid a single photograph across the table. The image was stark, a close-up of deep, jagged teeth marks imprinted in human flesh. "Do you recognize this?" Holden's voice was steady, but there was a flicker of urgency in his eyes. Elias studied the photo. "I've seen bite marks before," he murmured, "but never like this." Holden nodded once, as if expecting that response. "We matched the dental pattern to a dog named Bran." The name landed heavily. Bran, Mara Kaeton's dog. Mara, the spirited traveler who had vanished 6 years ago along a stretch of remote Montana highway. Her case had gone cold despite an exhaustive search. No body, no clear evidence. Just rumors and grief. Holden leaned forward. "We found Bran's bite on a man's forearm. Malcolm Draven." The name was unfamiliar to Elias. Holden filled in the blanks. A reclusive cattle rancher who lived far from town with his partner, Silas Crow. Neither man had spoken much during questioning. Both denied any involvement in Mara's disappearance. "But here's the thing," Holden continued, lowering his voice. "That bite mark is fresh. The scar tissue says otherwise." Elias frowned. "How is that possible?" "The wound happened years ago," Holden said. "The scarring tells us that. But the man who wears it has been lying about how he got it." Elias shifted in his chair, the weight of the situation sinking in. "And you think this ties back to Mara?" Holden didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened a folder and laid out more photos, a map of the area where Mara vanished, aerial shot of Malcolm's ranch, and a weather journal. The journal, Holden explained, had been found in Mara's abandoned camper. Its last entry mentioned stopping near a lonely cattle spread before nightfall. "That spread," Holden said, tapping the aerial photo, "belongs to Malcolm Draven." Elias felt a cold, not tightening in his stomach. Holden began walking him through the timeline. Mara and Bran had been traveling north, taking scenic back roads. She had stopped in a few small towns, bought gas, chatted with locals. Her last known stop had been a diner, where she'd told a waitress she planned to camp in the high meadows near the Draven property. She never made it past that point, Holden said. Elias listened, the forge smoke scent still clinging to him like a ghost. He'd known Mara in passing, a kind smile at the market, away from her truck window, but he hadn't been part of her circle. Now, somehow, his skills were being pulled into the core of the case. Holden explained why. Elias had a unique memory for patterns, shapes, and details. As a blacksmith, every curve, every bevel, every flaw in metal was etched into his mind. Holden believed that same eye could help interpret the physical evidence. "You keep records," Holden said. "Sketches, measurements, logs of every project. That kind of precision, it's what we need right now." Elias glanced at the photos again, particularly the one of Malcolm's arm. The bite mark was old, but its story was still alive. "What do you want me to do?" Elias asked. Holden's reply was simple. "Help me prove that Malcolm Draven and Silas Crow didn't just stumble across Mara Kaeton. Help me prove they kept her." The room seemed to shrink around Elias. Outside, the Montana wind rattled the station windows, carried with it a sound almost like distant howling. And for the first time since Mara's disappearance, Elias felt the faint but unshakable sense that the truth was close, dangerous, but close. The dirt road to the Draven ranch felt like it was swallowing Elias's truck whole. The narrow path wound through thick stands of lodgepole pine before spitting him out into a wide, wind-beaten expanse of prairie. There it was, the ranch Holden had warned him about. It wasn't large in the way most Montana cattle operations were. The land looked tired, with rusted barbed wire leaning at odd angles and pastures patchy from neglect. The main house, an aging two-story with weather-clabbered siding, sat like a watchtower over property. Beside it stood a barn whose roof sagged inward, as though bearing a burden it could no longer carry. Malcolm Draven emerged first. He was taller than Elias expected, all sharp angles and long arms, wearing a flannel shirt buttoned to the throat despite the heat. His eyes were pale, the kind of pale that made you think of lake ice in early spring, brittle and cold. Silas Crow followed him. Silas moved with the quiet precision of a man used to staying unnoticed. His hair was black and tied back. His face had an expression that seemed carved from stone. If Malcolm's presence was unsettling, Silas's was unreadable. Holden introduced Elias simply as a consultant. Malcolm's gaze lingered a beat too long. "You're not law enforcement," Malcolm said flatly. "I'm here to look at some things," Elias replied, keeping his tone neutral. Malcolm's lip twitched, as if considering whether to push further. But instead, he gestured toward the barn. "Dog's in there," he said. "Not much of him left now." The words carried an odd edge, part disdain, part something Elias couldn't name. Inside the barn, Brand's remains lay in a shallow, unmarked grave in the dirt floor. Holden crouched beside the unearthed skeleton, gloved hands brushing away soil. "Jaws intact," Holden said quietly. "That's how we matched the bite." Elias crouched too, examining the teeth. Even in death, the dog's jaw held a brutal strength. He could almost see the moment those teeth had sunk into Malcolm Draven's arm. When they stepped outside again, Silas was leaning against the porch rail, watching them with the stillness of a hunting owl. "Never seen that woman you're talking about," Silas said suddenly, though no one had asked him anything yet. His voice was low, but each word was clipped. Holden met his eyes. "Funny, her journal puts her right here." Silas's jaw tightened. "People come and go. We mind our business." It was Malcolm who finally broke the stare down. "If you're done digging up dogs," he said, "you can be on your way." But Holden didn't move. "We'll be back. With a warrant." That drew a dry laugh from Malcolm. "You think a piece of paper changes anything out here?" As they drove away, Elias kept glancing in the side mirror. Both men stood on the porch, still watching. The figures grew smaller with distance, but their presence didn't fade. Holden broke the silence first. "You feel it too, don't you?" Elias didn't need to ask what he meant. There was something about that ranch, something that hummed just beneath the surface, like a live wire buried in the dirt. And somewhere in that soil, Elias was sure the truth about Mara Kaeton was waiting. The warrant arrived on a gray morning, the kind where clouds hung low enough to scrape the treetops. Elias Rourke stood beside Detective Holden Vance on the porch of the Draven Ranch, the court order folded neatly in Holden's hand like a quiet threat. Malcolm Draven answered the door slowly. His face carried no surprise, only that faint, icy smirk, the same one that made Elias's skin crawl the first time they met. "You brought your magic paper," Malcolm said, leaning one shoulder against the frame. Holden didn't smile. "We're coming in." Silas Crow appeared in the hallway behind Malcolm. His dark eyes moved from Holden to Elias without a flicker of emotion, as if cataloging them both for some private ledger. Without a word, he stepped back, disappearing into the shadows of the house. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of old wood and stale smoke. The walls were lined with taxidermy, deer heads, a black bear, a coyote mid-snarl. Each seemed to watch the intrusion. Holden moved methodically, starting with the main living area. Elias peeled away toward the kitchen, where the counters were cluttered with chipped mugs and unopened mail. A single knife block sat on the counter, but one slot was empty. The barn was next. It was darker than Elias remembered. The sunlight filtered through warped boards, striping the dirt floor. Holden's team began pulling up sections of the ground, searching for signs of more than just Brand's shallow grave. Hours passed before they found it. A small, rusted tin box buried beneath a feed trough. Inside were scraps of fabric, brittle and dirt-stained. One piece caught Elias's breath, deep red, patterned with tiny white flowers. It matched the shirt Mara Kaeton had been wearing in the last photograph her family ever saw. Holden stood over the box for a long moment. "We'll get it tested," he said, though his voice carried no doubt. They moved to the outbuildings. In a narrow shed near the tree line, Elias found something stranger still, A leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with neat, meticulous handwriting. The entries weren't financial. Each page documented a date, a description, and sometimes a name. The last full entry read simply, July 14th. Woman, dark hair, dog wouldn't stop barking. Elias felt his throat tighten. Holden, he called quietly. When Holden read the entry, his jaw locked. Bag it. Outside, Malcolm and Silas stood together near the fence, speaking in low voices. They didn't look toward the shed, but Elias had the unsettling sense they knew exactly what had been found. As the team loaded their vehicles, Malcolm finally called out, "You think you got answers now? All you got is dirt and old cloth." Holden didn't respond. The engines roared to life, the ranch receding in the mirrors. But Elias knew they weren't just leaving with evidence. They were leaving with the first thread of a story that had been buried for 6 years, and now, at last, was beginning to unravel. Back at the station, Holden spread the ledger across the evidence table. The paper was brittle, edges yellowed, but the ink was sharp, as if each stroke had been carved in the page with intent. Elias stood over it, scanning the columns. The earliest entry was dated 6 years ago. May 3rd. Boy, blonde hair, left shoe missing. No name, no location, just a detail, a fragment of someone's last day. Holden flipped pages slowly. August 21st. Man limp in left leg. Rain all morning. October 9th. Woman, green scarf. Sang while walking. The handwriting never wavered. Each line perfectly spaced. It wasn't the chaos of a killer's mind. It was the precision of someone who wanted their record to be kept. Across the table, forensic analyst Dana Mercer tapped a gloved finger on one entry. Here, January 16th, 3 years ago. Girl, brown coat, found by creek. She looked at Holden. We had a missing persons report that month. 12-year-old from Burkett, brown coat, went missing near a creek bed. Holden's expression hardened. Cross-check every entry. Start with confirmed missing persons within a 50-mile radius. Hours later, the results painted a grim picture. 13 entries could be tied to real cases. Most had been dead ends at the time. No suspects, no witnesses, nothing but a vanished face on a poster. One entry chilled Elias more than the rest. November 2nd. Woman, baby crying. That could be Mara Kaeton. Dana said quietly. Neighbors heard a baby crying the night she disappeared. The child was never found. Holden didn't answer immediately. His gaze was locked on the final page, where the handwriting stopped abruptly midline. As if the writer had been interrupted, it read, August 4th. Woman, short hair, ran. The rest was blank. Elias felt the silence settle over the room. Whoever kept that ledger had been about to record another entry, and had never finished. Holden finally spoke. We need to find out who wrote this, and we need to find them fast. But as Elias studied the even, deliberate penmanship, a question formed in the back of his mind, one he didn't dare say out loud. What if the person who wrote it wasn't the one who did the killing? The first snow of the season had fallen overnight, laying a muffled silence over the valley. Holden and Elias drove north on a narrow gravel road, the world reduced to whites and grays. They were headed to the far edge of the county, Malcolm Draven's land. The ranch appeared out of the mist like a ghost. Weather-beaten barns leaned under the weight of years, and a line of skeletal fence posts vanished into the white horizon. 2 figures emerged near the gate. Malcolm, broad-shouldered and unmoving, and Silas Crow, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, face shadowed under the brim of a hat. Holden stepped out of the car. The cold bit instantly at his skin. Mr. Draven, Mr. Crow, we'd like to ask you about a book that may have passed through your property. Malcolm's eyes flickered. The smallest shift, but Elias saw it. Silas remained still, his breath curling in the air. We don't keep books here, Malcolm said flatly. Not even ledgers? Something for tracking cattle, repairs, visitors? Holden pressed. Silas glanced toward the barn. The movement was quick, but Elias followed it. There, just beyond the doorway, a dark shape hung from a hook, a thick leather strap, the kind used to tether large animals. Its edge was frayed, darkened. Holden moved closer to Malcolm. 6 years ago, a woman named Mara Kaeton disappeared while traveling this region. Do you remember seeing her? No, the answer came too quickly. Elias's gaze dropped to Malcolm's hands. Even in the cold, he wasn't wearing gloves. A pale, puckered scar curved across the back of his right hand, ragged and deep. It looked less like a clean cut and more like a wound left by teeth. Holden saw it too. That's quite a mark. How'd you get it? Malcolm's jaw tightened. Dog. Years back. What kind of dog? Holden asked, his tone too casual to be innocent. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. Does it matter? Elias spoke then, his voice even. It does if the dog's name was Bran. The air shifted. Silas's head turned slightly toward them for the first time, and though he said nothing, the stillness in his gaze was sharper than words. Holden didn't push further. Not yet. Instead, he handed Malcolm a card. If anything comes to mind, give me a call. As they drove away, Elias watched the ranch shrink in the rearview mirror. That scar, he began. Holden nodded. It's not just a scar. It's a bite mark. And Bran didn't survive to tell us why he bit him. The snow kept falling, soft and unbroken, but Elias couldn't shake the image. Teeth sinking into flesh, a struggle in the cold, and a dog's final act of defiance. The next morning, Holden Vance was back at his desk before sunrise. The case file spread like a shuffled deck of fate. He ran a finger along the spine of Elias Rourke's compiled notes, measurements, sketches, dates. Somewhere in that meticulous handwriting was a path forward. Elias arrived with 2 steaming cups of coffee and a manila envelope under his arm. I couldn't sleep, he admitted, placing the envelope down. This is every documented bite injury I could find from local veterinary reports in the last decade. You'd be surprised how often dogs end up in the middle of human disputes. Holden flipped the envelope open. And you think Malcolm Draven's hand shows up here? Elias nodded. I think Bran's teeth do. The first dozen files were dead ends, minor incidents, domestic disputes, farm accidents. But then Holden stopped on a report from 6 years ago. The date was burned into his memory, the week Mara Kaeton vanished. It was a vet's emergency log from a clinic 2 towns over. The entry was short but damning. Large canine euthanized after incident resulting in severe human injury. Owner declined to press charges against the animal. Patient's name, Bran. Holden looked up slowly. Who brought Bran in? Elias leaned over, tapping the signature line. Silas Crow. The room seemed to constrict. It was one thing to suspect Malcolm's scar came from Bran. It was another to see Silas's name tethered to moment like a knot. Holden stood. We need to talk to the vet. The clinic was a modest brick building on the edge of town, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. A woman in her 50s greeted them. She introduced herself as Dr. Etta Rowan, the one who had treated Bran. Do you remember the dog? Holden asked, her brow furrowed. I remember the man who brought him in. Quiet. Stood in the corner the whole time. His hand kept trembling, not from the cold, from something else. She glanced between them. The dog had blood on his teeth. Not his own. Whatever he bit hard. I could smell the iron before I even looked in his mouth. Holden showed her a photo of Malcolm Draven from the sheriff's files. That's him, she said immediately. The one with the wound. But he wasn't the one who signed the papers. That was the other man. Silas, always a shadow beside Malcolm. Elias asked, did either of them say what happened? Not directly. But the quiet one, Silas, said the dog wasn't going to stop. Outside, the snow had thinned into a light drizzle, melting into rivulets along the street. Holden leaned against the car. That's it. That's the night Mara fought back. Elias's voice was low, and Bran bought her seconds she probably didn't get to keep. The drizzle turned to sleet, clicking against the windshield like the sound of typewriter keys hammering out a confession no one wanted to read. By late afternoon, Holden Vance had already made the decision. Malcolm Draven and Silas Crow would be brought in separately. No lawyers present, no distractions, just the kind of cold room quiet that could make even the most seasoned liar lean forward and confess without realizing it. The interrogation rooms at the county building were narrow and bare, with buzzing fluorescent lights that left skin looking bloodless. Silas was led into one of them first. He sat down without a word, hands folded neatly, eyes fixed on some invisible point on the far wall. Holden stepped in with a thin file under his arm. "You were there when Bran died," he said plainly. Silas's gaze didn't move. "You signed the papers. You told the vet he wasn't going to stop. That's what you said, right?" A slight tightening in Silas's jaw. It wasn't much, but Holden knew the shift. A silent flinch. "You see," Holden continued, leaning in just enough, "a dog doesn't just keep going unless he's defending something. Or someone." The air between them stayed taut and thin. Silas's stillness was almost unnerving. It was as if he had trained himself to become furniture, to exist without reaction. Holden dropped a photo on the table. Bran's veterinary report alongside a faded picture of Mara Kaeton smiling at a roadside diner. Bran's head resting on her knee. "She trusted you," Holden said softly, almost like an accusation wrapped in grief. "Or at least, she trusted the man you worked beside." For the first time, Silas blinked and looked away. Meanwhile, in the adjoining room, Malcolm Draven sat under the same flickering light. Elias Rourke, at Holden's request, joined in this round. Malcolm seemed almost amused when Elias entered, a craftsman interrogating a rancher. "I make things with precision," Elias began, placing his leather-bound ledger on the table. "I notice patterns. Your hand, the one with the scars, doesn't fit the story you told the sheriff 6 years ago." Malcolm smirked. "You've been studying me?" "I've been studying the wound," Elias replied. "And I've been studying Bran's bite radius. They match like iron fits its mold." Malcolm's smirk faded. "You can keep pretending it was an accident," Elias said, voice steady. "But we have the vet statement. We have the date. And we have the name of the dog's owner, Mara Kaeton, the woman you never reported seeing." Malcolm leaned back, his chair creaking. "Careful, blacksmith. You're hammering on something you don't understand." "Maybe not," Elias said, "but the man I see in front of me, he's not used to people knowing the truth before he's ready to give it." Through the observation glass, Holden watched both men in their separate rooms. Silas had withdrawn further into silence. Malcolm was showing first signs of crack, the slight shifting in his seat, the way his hands flexed unconsciously. It wasn't a confession. Not yet, but it was enough to prove one thing. The wall between them was starting to crumble, and all Holden had to do was keep pressing until it fell. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the building like an old barn door in a storm. The sterile interrogation room felt smaller as the hours stretched on. Malcolm Draven sat, hands clasped but restless, the deep scars on his forearm now visible under the dim light, the tangible evidence of Bran's desperate defense. The leathered skin told a story his words refused to reveal. Holden Vance leaned forward, voice low but relentless. "Malcolm, I'm not here to play games. You and Silas were together that night. You shared that cabin with Mara Kaeton and Bran. The storm trapped you all inside." Malcolm's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing his stoic expression. "That cabin isn't much. A place to wait out the weather." "But you didn't just wait," Holden said, his gaze piercing. "You killed her." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." Holden produced a worn photograph of the mantelpiece, the intricate carvings etched beneath the wood, their disturbing geometry. "These symbols, your symbols, the ones from Elias Rourke's forge. They mark you, your twisted ideology." For a moment, Malcolm's facade wavered, his breathing shallow. "You strangled her while she slept," Holden pressed. "Bran fought back, bit you hard enough to leave scars. You burned him alive in the fireplace as punishment, and then you sealed the chimney to trap him." Malcolm's fingers trembled slightly, betraying the calm mask. "That dog was a threat." "A threat to what?" Holden's voice was steady but cold. "Your secrets? Your darkness." The room grew colder still, the weight of silence pressing in. Outside the door, footsteps echoed. Silas Crow's turn came next, but something was different now. The silence between them was no longer a shield, but a fragile thread stretched thin. Holden knew this was only the beginning. The early morning mist clung thick to sprawling fields of Malcolm Draven and Silas Crow's isolated Montana farm. Underneath the heavy sky, a team of searchers, forensic experts, and K-9 units moved with grim determination. The ground, cold and unyielding, held the final secrets they had hunted for 6 long years. Holden Vance watched silently as excavation began in the remote section Malcolm had disclosed, a place deep in the woods where the earth had been freshly disturbed. The solemn faces of the team mirrored the weight of what was to come. Here lay Mara Kaeton, spirited traveler and victim of a dark, ritualistic violence, whose story had captivated and haunted the region. Hours later, the earth gave way to brittle, fragile remains, long hidden beneath layers of soil and silence. The team carefully unearthed the bones, their reverence palpable. For Holden, it was more than closure. It was a final confrontation with the wilderness that had swallowed Mara whole, a wilderness now exposed as a backdrop to unspeakable cruelty. Back at the station, the wheels of justice turned swiftly. Malcolm Draven, facing the weight of overwhelming evidence and the scars marking his guilt, pled guilty to first-degree murder and aggravated animal cruelty. His confession, chilling in its calculated coldness, spared him the death penalty but sentenced him to a life behind bars, a permanent exile from the world he had once sought to control. Silas Crow, the silent partner in this grim tale, remained steadfast in his refusal to speak. His trial became a battle of shadows, his defense desperate to distance him from the horrors committed. But the symbols linking him to the crime scene, the altar-like spaces on the farm, and Malcolm's detailed testimony sealed his fate. Guilty on all counts, Silas joined a companion in a life sentence without parole. For Detective Holden Vance, the verdict was bittersweet. The wilderness had not claimed Mara Kaeton by accident or nature's indifferent hand. Instead, it had been a stage for human darkness disguised behind isolation and twisted belief. Though the investigation left lingering questions about the true extent of Malcolm and Silas's deeds, no further victims emerged. Their farm, a fortress of secrets and ritual, was finally silent. Yet the echoes of their crimes would haunt the vast Montana wilderness for years to come. And for those who knew Mara and Bran, the truth, though harrowing, offered a mournful peace. A reminder that even in the most remote corners of the world, justice, however delayed, could still break through the shadows.